Thanks, Wendy, for that introduction. So this will be, again, a little bit of a whistle-stop tour through reproduction and reproductive disease in rabbits. And I want to just go through reproduction, particularly because it varies somewhat from the cat and the dog, and also to discuss the anatomy and the physiology of this. Right, so to start off with, I want to look at this subject from really two perspectives, and in my practice it's quite polarized in many cases. And I want to look at the perspective of improving the welfare of our pet rabbits, but also supporting the fertility of the breeding does that we see. And as part of a rabbit-friendly practice, we do need to sort of cover both of these bases. And equally, what we need to discuss at this stage is routine neutering and the advice that we need to give about this, the ages, what have you, as well as instruments for recognizing poor fertility in the rabbit. And who'd have thought that rabbits could have issues with fertility, and to recognize what other conditions and diseases can be associated or specifically cause poor fertility. So I wanted to just very briefly remind ourselves of the anatomy of the rabbit's reproductive tract. These are two illustrations from the laboratory animal Popesco from Elsevier. And this right-hand side one is the female reproductive tract. And I just want to highlight that we've got ovaries that are a little bit more caudal than those of the dog or the cat. We have paired uterine horns, but no actual uterine body. The uterine horns join paired cervices, and then both of the cervices join into a single vaginal vault at this stage. And you can see here that the bladder has been reflected. Also want to just mention the mesometrium, and as we'll see in a few slides' time, this can be a really prime area for fat deposition in older or overweight does, and it can physically make the act of neutering very, very much more difficult. To proceed to the male, again, this is a slightly more caudal view, and what we have here are the bulbourethral glands, the shaft of the penis, the perineal glands, and the pre-, para, and prostatic glands, and then the seminal, the ductus deferentius. And again, very similar in many cases to the cat and the dog. The penis is situated actually caudal to the testicles, and there is not an os penis in the rabbit at all. So it's fibrous rather than bony. What this means physically, as far as neutering, etc., is that actually we don't need to worry as much about causing damage to the penis and the urethra, perhaps as we might in other species. So I think the first thing that causes issues with rabbit reproductive medicine is actually correctly sexing individuals between male and female. Rabbits are best sexed when they're very young, between about 4 and 6 or 7 weeks of age, because that is the easiest point at which to do it. And what you're looking at is the perineal area, and you're looking at the genital aperture and its position and shape relative to the anus. In females, the genital aperture is slit-shaped, and in males there's a single pinpoint opening, which is the opening of the urethra at the tip of the penis. Usually between about 6 and 10 weeks, this becomes a little bit more equivocal and more difficult to achieve. Once rabbits are a bit older, between 10 and 12 weeks, then we should be looking at the testicles having descended, and even if the testicles are not visible because they've been retracted back up into the abdomen because the inguinal canal remains open, you should still be able to see the scrotal sacs. They'll still be present even if the testicles are retracted. Where you can sometimes get issues is where there is a hypospadias or a deformity of the penis and it hasn't closed normally at the tip, and this can make the aperture appear slit-like, whereas in fact it is the tip of the penis rather than an eversion of the vulva. So correct sexing is absolutely key, but as I say, many people do find this difficult, and it's very important as far as preventing unwanted litters and things like that. So how are we developing and what happens at what time? Because I wanted to discuss development and sexual maturity specifically because it affects our advice regarding splitting litters and also our advice regarding times at neutering or times at mating. And as you can see from this slide, various different breeds will mature at different times. It is almost directly related to eventual body size, so that larger breeds of rabbits will develop more slowly and reach sexual maturity at a later age. It is not always similar as to which sex develops maturity first, and quite often in general, often the females will become sexually mature before the males, but this is not always consistent, as you can see. So what we're looking at is sort of combining our advice regarding neutering with the development of the specific breed. So in rabbit medicine in particular, and particularly as far as female rabbits go, or does, puberty is defined at the time at which induced ovulation can first occur, and this is not the same as sexual maturity. Sexual maturity is the point at which the female is ready to reproduce, and certainly rabbit breeders very strongly advocate that the female should be physically mature and no longer growing before breeding occurs at the first stage. And because what commonly happens, particularly in show rabbits, is that a young doe will have 2 or 3 litters before she is then certainly retired. And if you have a first litter at a very young age, that litter is likely to be smaller perhaps than ideal, which may mean that individual kits are larger than normal, and this can lead to dystocia in the longer term, and we'll go to that and discuss that a little bit later on. If we're looking at breeding, particularly again with rabbits that are specifically breeding animals, the season is relatively well defined, and breeding starts in and around January and extends to September or October, and the breeding season is stimulated by the increasing day length and again suppressed by the reducing day length in the autumn. You can tell if a female is in season by examining the vulva, which becomes pink and swollen when she's receptive. And most females will be receptive most of the time, and the statistics that I've seen suggest that most females will be receptive around 12 out of 14 days throughout the breeding season. Male rabbits, you can tell that they're sort of in breeding condition because the weight and the size of the testicles will be somewhat larger than it is outside of the breeding season. And I find that that's perhaps a little bit more of a difficult thing to tell unless you know a specific individual buck very well. I think breeder rabbit owners are certainly much more able to tell. And equally, there's also sometimes a degree of tension